"She's been kicked off 3 bases, Colonel. She's dead weight." Laughter echoed across the sniper range. Behind the tinted glass, Colonel Reeves didn't smile. His eyes stayed locked on the quiet woman gripping her rifle. Then he whispered, "No, that's Ghost 6. And Fort Bragg was about to find out what that meant. Something didn't add up. Women rarely made it into this program, and those who did came with spotless records. Grace Mitchell had been removed from 3 different bases, her file thick with disciplinary notes and transfers. Yet here she stood, taking up a precious training slot that 100 qualified soldiers would kill for. The other recruits had already given her a nickname, Ghost, not because she moved like one, but because she was barely there, a shadow of what a real soldier should be. But shadows sometimes hide the most dangerous truths. As Grace bent to retrieve her rifle, morning sunlight caught something on her neck. A scar, thin and precise, the kind that came from a blade held with professional intent. Sergeant Hayes noticed her grip on the weapon for just a moment before she fumbled again. Her fingers had found their position with the unconscious precision of someone who'd held a rifle 10,000 times before. In this world, weakness got you killed. One mistake eliminated you from the program. Reputation was everything, and Grace Mitchell's reputation was that of a washout, a quota filler, dead weight dragging down the unit. The instructors made no secret of their disdain. The recruits treated her like she had something contagious. In the testosterone-soaked atmosphere of military elite training, she was an anomaly that didn't belong. But what nobody knew was that Grace Mitchell had already died once before. Fort Bragg's Advanced Sniper Training Center sprawled across North Carolina's pine forests like a concrete predator waiting to devour the weak. This wasn't just any military facility. This was where America forged its long-range killers, the invisible hands of death that reached out across impossible distances. The walls displayed photographs of legendary marksmen, their eyes cold and calculating, their records written in confirmed kills. Every face was male. Every story spoke of glory earned through perfect shots and enemy bodies. The message was clear. This was no place for the weak, and certainly no place for women who couldn't even hold their rifles properly. Grace Mitchell moved through the facility like she was apologizing for existing. At 5 feet 4 inches, she disappeared inside oversized fatigues that hung on her small frame like a child playing soldier. Her blonde hair stayed pulled back in a regulation bun that somehow still looked wrong. When instructors barked questions, she answered in monosyllables. Yes, sir. No, sir. Never more than necessary. Her movements were slow, methodical, like someone constantly second-guessing themselves. The other recruits had stopped trying to engage her after the first week. She was furniture that occasionally got in the way. Sergeant Derek Hayes ruled the training grounds with the kind of authority that came from never having his competence questioned. 35 years old, decorated with every training commendation the Army offered, he embodied what these recruits aspired to become. His voice could make grown men flinch. He believed in breaking soldiers down to build them back stronger, and he especially believed that women had no place in combat roles. The 3 females who'd attempted his course before had all washed out within 2 weeks. He took personal pride in maintaining standards, and Grace Mitchell was an insult to everything he stood for. Colonel James Reeves watched it all from his office window. At 55, he'd seen enough combat to fill a library with nightmares. His weathered face rarely showed emotion, and he spoke only when necessary. The facility ran on his reputation and iron discipline. Unlike Hayes, Reeves had seen what real warfare looked like. He'd lost men, saved men, and made decisions that haunted him. He also knew things about Grace Mitchell that weren't in any file the instructors had access to. He knew what Black Viper meant. He knew why she was really here. The hierarchy at Fort Bragg was simple and brutal. Performance determined everything. Reputation could save your life or destroy it. In this male-dominated culture, women had to prove themselves twice over just to be considered half as good. Grace hadn't proved anything except that she could absorb mockery without breaking. Every mistake she made became ammunition for Hayes' lectures on maintaining standard. Every fumbled drill reinforced the narrative that she was a diversity hire, a political gesture in uniform. But sometimes, when no one was watching, something else showed through. During weapons maintenance, her hands moved with an efficiency that contradicted her training scores. When the instructors demonstrated room-clearing techniques, her body shifted into positions that suggested muscle memory. Her file said she shouldn't have. Her eyes, when she forgot to keep them downcast, swept environments like a predator cataloging threats. These moments lasted seconds before disappearing back into her careful performance of incompetence. The mess hall buzzed with conversations about confirmed kills and impossible shots. Trophy cases displayed the achievements of past graduates who'd gone on to legendary military careers. The shooting ranges stretched out to distances that challenged even experienced marksmen. In the barracks, bunk placement reflected the unofficial hierarchy. Grace's bunk sat in the corner, isolated like a quarantine zone. The message was clear. Contamination by association with failure was a career killer. Corporal Jackson, 22 and fresh from his third deployment, led the unofficial harassment committee. Martinez, 24, followed whatever Jackson did because thinking was harder than following. Brooks, 26, saw Grace as an opportunity to prove his alpha status to the younger recruits. They made sure she knew her place every morning, every meal, every training exercise, but Grace never responded. She took their contempt like she took Hayes's insults, with a silence that somehow made them push harder. What they didn't understand was that Grace had learned long ago that the loudest soldiers were usually the ones who'd never heard enemy fire. But she kept that knowledge locked away, along with everything else. The morning sun barely touched the 800-yard range when Sergeant Hayes decided to make an example of Grace Mitchell. The live fire exercise was supposed to test advanced marksmanship under pressure, but Hayes had something else in mind. He gathered the recruits with the theatrical flair of someone who enjoyed public executions. Grace stood apart from the group, her rifle held with that strange combination of fumbling incompetence and hidden precision that had become her signature. Hayes's voice boomed across the range like artillery. "Let's see what our special case can do when it really counts. Mitchell, you're up first. Jackson, Martinez, Brooks, you'll shoot after her. Pay attention, gentlemen. This is what happens when we lower our standards for political correctness. This is what happens when we pretend everyone can be a warrior. Mitchell, take your position. Miss this shot, and you're gone. I've had enough of carrying dead weight." The other recruits formed a semicircle behind the firing line, their excitement palpable. This was better than television. They were about to watch Hayes destroy someone who never should have been here in the first place. Grace accepted the rifle Hayes handed her without examining it, another sign of her amateur status. A real sniper would have checked every component. But as she moved toward the prone position, something subtle shifted in her bearing. Her breathing changed, became rhythmic in a way that Hayes almost noticed before dismissing it. Grace lay down on the shooting mat with movements that seemed clumsy until you realized each adjustment positioned her body in textbook perfect alignment. The rifle Hayes had given her was deliberately sabotaged, its scope knocked off zero, the barrel slightly fouled. 800 yards in a crosswind with damaged equipment was a shot that would challenge even experienced marksmen. Hayes wanted her to fail spectacularly, publicly. Finally, the recruits whispered bets on how badly she'd miss. "Take your time, Mitchell." Hayes' voice dripped sarcasm. "We've got all day to watch you embarrass yourself. Although honestly, I don't know why you're even trying. 3 bases couldn't make a soldier out of you. What makes you think you belong here? Women like you get real warriors killed. You're taking a spot from someone who could actually contribute. But please, show us your skills." Grace's response was silence. She settled into her position with the kind of stillness that made the air around her seem to pause. Her finger found the trigger guard, her eye aligned with the damaged scope. For a moment, just a moment, the fumbling trainee disappeared. What remained was something else entirely. Something that made Corporal Jackson stop mid-joke. Something that made Martinez take an unconscious step back. Something that Colonel Reeves, watching from his office window, had been waiting to see. The shot, when it came, was perfect. 800 yards through a 10-mile-per-hour crosswind, with a scope that should have thrown the bullet 3 feet off target. The steel target rang like a bell, dead center mass. The laughter died instantly. 20 recruits stood in absolute silence, processing what they'd just witnessed. Hayes grabbed the rifle, examined the scope, confirmed it was as damaged as he'd arranged. His face went through several shades of red before settling on purple. Lucky shot. That's all Hayes could manage. Pure luck. Nobody makes that shot with this equipment. Nobody. Mitchell, do it again. Right now. Same target. Prove that wasn't a fluke. Because we all know it was. There's no way someone like you has that kind of skill. No way. Grace stood slowly, handed the rifle back without a word, and walked toward her place in formation. She didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She didn't even acknowledge what she'd just done. But the damage to Hazy's narrative was complete. The recruits looked at her differently now. Jackson studied her stance, trying to understand how she'd compensated for the wind. Martinez noticed how her trigger pull had been timed between heartbeats. Brooks saw the way she'd adjusted for the damaged scope without even seeming to check it. Colonel Reeves chose that moment to make his appearance. He walked onto the range with the measured pace of someone who'd learned that rushing rarely improved outcomes. Hayes snapped to attention, the other instructors following suit. The colonel's weathered face revealed nothing as he surveyed the scene. His eyes lingered on Grace for a moment before turning to Hayes. When he spoke, his voice carried the kind of quiet authority that made shouting unnecessary. "Sergeant Hayes, a word." The two men stepped away from the recruits, but not far enough to prevent fragments of conversation from drifting back. Something about red line operations, something about classification levels, something about things Hayes wasn't cleared to know. When Hayes returned, his face had lost several shades of color. He looked at Grace with something new in his eyes. Not respect, not yet, but uncertainty. The foundation of his world had developed a crack. That night, Colonel Reeves made a call to a secure line. "Sir, she's here, the last one. Should I tell them who she really is?" The voice on the other end was cold. "Not yet. Let's see what she's made of now." 3 weeks of systematic humiliation had pushed Grace Mitchell to the edge of visibility. Hayes assigned her every punishment detail, every extra watch, every degrading task he could justify under training protocols. But something had shifted since the shooting range incident. The recruits watched her now with curiosity instead of contempt. Brooks finally voiced what they'd all been thinking during a midnight watch. "What are you hiding? Nobody makes shots like that and stays silent. Nobody takes this much abuse without breaking. Who are you, really?" Grace's response was the same silence that had become her shield, but this time it triggered something in Hayes. The next morning, he made an announcement that would change everything. "Since Mitchell thinks she's special, tomorrow she demonstrates her expertise to the entire facility. Every instructor, every recruit, every support staff member will watch her show us what 3 failed base assignments taught her. When she fails, and she will fail, maybe we can finally return to real standards." The assembly hall filled with anticipation. Word had spread about the impossible shot, grown in the telling until Grace had become either a secret genius or the luckiest amateur in military history. Hayes had arranged multiple shooting stations, 1,200-yard static targets, moving targets at 600 yards, night vision shots that challenged even instructors. He wanted to destroy not just Grace, but the mythology growing around her. What he didn't know was that Colonel Reeves had received a phone call that changed everything. The classified file in Reeves' hand felt heavier than its weight suggested. As Hayes prepared to begin his public execution, Reeves stepped forward. His voice cut through the anticipation like a blade. "Sergeant Hayes, before we proceed, I have a question. What do you know about Operation Redline?" Hayes straightened, confusion evident. "Never heard of it, sir. That's classified, well above my level." "Indeed it is." Reeves opened the file. "Which is why you couldn't have known that you've been systematically humiliating one of the most decorated operators in American military history. Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you about Black Viper." The room went completely still. Reeves continued with the methodical precision of someone delivering a mission briefing. "Operation Redline was our most classified counterterrorism initiative from 2018 to 2019. 7 operators, recruited from various special forces units, formed a team designated Black Viper. Their mission was simple: eliminate high-value targets that conventional forces couldn't reach. They operated in denied territories across 3 continents. Their average kill distance was 1,847 meters. Reeves paused, letting the number sink in. These 7 operators saved thousands of American lives. They prevented terrorist attacks you never heard about because Black Viper got there first. They were ghosts, shadows, death incarnate, until an intelligence leak led them into an ambush in Eastern Europe. 6 operators died that day. Betrayed, outnumbered, outgunned. 1 survived. 1 operator spent 14 months behind enemy lines, evading capture, living off the land, making her way home through hostile territory. The file opened to reveal a photograph. Younger, harder, but unmistakably Grace Mitchell. Call sign Widow 27. 127 confirmed kills. Longest confirmed shot, 2,100 meters. The only American to survive the Red Line massacre. The woman you've been calling dead weight has killed more enemies than this entire facility combined. Hayes' transformation was instant and complete. His face went white, his hands shook, the carefully constructed persona of the dominant instructor crumbled. "Sir, I couldn't have known." The apologies that followed sounded pathetic even to him. Around the room, recruits processed the revelation differently. Jackson whispered to Martinez, "Those scars aren't from training accidents. They're from torture." Brooks stared at Grace with something approaching awe. She watched them die, her whole team, and she survived alone. Reeves wasn't finished. The betrayal came from within. Black Viper's handler sold them out for money. Grace watched her teammates die one by one, unable to save them. When she finally made it home, she discovered that officially, Black Viper never existed. No honors, no recognition, no benefits. The government she'd killed for pretended she was never there, discharged quietly, told to disappear, forbidden from discussing operations that officially never happened. Grace stood motionless through the revelation, her face revealing nothing. When Reeves finished, Hayes approached her, stammering, "Ma'am, you don't need to prove anything. We understand now. I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry." Grace's voice, when she finally spoke, carried a different quality. Cold, professional, the voice of someone who'd given target confirmations over encrypted radios. "Colonel, should I proceed with the demonstration?" The silence that followed could have been measured in heartbeats. Then Grace moved. No wasted motion now, no fumbling, no hesitation. She approached the first station with the mechanical precision of someone who'd done this 10,000 times. The 1,200-yard shot that should have been impossible with iron sights hit dead center. She moved to the next station, then the next, each shot perfect, each movement a lesson in economy of motion. As Grace walked away, Jackson whispered what everyone was thinking. How many other heroes are we too blind to see? But Grace had learned something else in those mountains. Respect, earned through suffering, cuts deeper than any words. The transformation of Fort Bragg's Advanced Sniper Training Center happened in hours, not days. News of Grace Mitchell's true identity spread through the facility like wildfire, carrying with it a complete inversion of the social hierarchy. The woman they'd mocked now commanded respect through her mere presence. Instructors who'd dismissed her struggled to make eye contact. Recruits who'd laughed at her fumbling now studied her every movement, desperate to learn from someone who'd survived what they only trained for. Sergeant Derek Hayes experienced his own personal hell. Sleep became impossible. Every insult he'd hurled at Grace replayed in his mind with perfect clarity. The woman he'd called dead weight had more combat experience than the entire instructor cadre combined. His carefully built reputation as an elite trainer crumbled as the truth spread. He'd never seen combat, never taken a life, never faced an enemy who shot back. His expertise was theoretical. Hers was written in blood and survival. 3 days after the revelation, he submitted his resignation to Colonel Reeves. The recruit's transformation was equally profound. Jackson approached Grace during weapons maintenance, his cocky attitude replaced with genuine respect. "Ma'am, would you consider teaching us real combat techniques? The things that kept you alive out there?" Grace's response was characteristically minimal. "You're learning them already. Pay attention." But something shifted. She began correcting stances with subtle touches. Her few words carried weight that Hayes's shouting never achieved. When Martinez's trigger discipline slipped, she simply moved his finger, saying, "That gets you killed." When Brooks swept his muzzle across another recruit, she stopped him with a look that conveyed more than any lecture could. Throughout the facility, a mythology began building around Widow 27. Recruits researched Black Viper online, finding only empty spaces where classified operations should be. The absence of information made her legend grow. Stories spread about her impossible shots, her survival behind enemy lines, the torture scars hidden beneath her uniform. Each retelling added layers until Grace became something more than human, the ghost who walked among them, teaching death to those who thought they understood it. But Grace hadn't come here for recognition. She'd come to disappear, to hide from memories that wouldn't stop replaying. Now everyone knew her story, or at least the parts Colonel Reeves had revealed. The anonymity she'd craved was gone. She considered leaving, disappearing again, finding another place where nobody knew about Black Viper. But something held her here. These recruits, cocky and ignorant and alive, reminded her of her team before that final mission. Maybe keeping them alive could balance the scales. Maybe teaching them could quiet the ghosts. Late one night, Jackson found her on the range, sending rounds down range in perfect rhythm. The mechanical precision of her shooting was hypnotic. Between magazines, he asked the question everyone wondered about. Why did you stay silent so long? Why let Hayes humiliate you? Grace loaded another magazine before answering. Words don't bring back the dead, but maybe training you will save the living. Her voice carried the weight of 14 months alone in hostile territory, of watching 6 teammates die, of surviving when she shouldn't have. For the first time, she'd explained her motivation to someone who might understand. Hayes's attempted redemption came 2 days before his planned departure. He found Grace cleaning her rifle in an empty classroom, approached with none of his former swagger. "I was wrong, about everything, about you, about women in combat, about what makes a warrior. I'm sorry." The words came out stilted, formal, nothing like his usual booming confidence. Grace studied him for a long moment, reading something in his face that made her nod. "You were doing your job. I was hiding from mine." The absolution in those simple words hit Hayes harder than any condemnation could have. When he told Reeves he was leaving because he couldn't train killers when he'd never killed, the colonel's response surprised him. "Then learn from someone who has. Stay, learn, become what you've been pretending to be." Hayes stayed. He became Grace's first official student, following her sparse instructions with the dedication of someone given a second chance. His transformation from tormentor to disciple became another layer in the mythology surrounding Widow 27. If she could humble and rebuild someone like Hayes, what couldn't she do? Grace never accepted a formal instructor position, but it didn't matter. The recruits naturally deferred to her expertise. When she demonstrated a technique, training stopped to watch. When she corrected a stance, that correction became gospel. She taught through example rather than words, showing rather than telling. Her authority came from competence so obvious that rank became irrelevant. The healing happened slowly, measured in small victories. Each recruit who mastered a technique she taught was a small redemption. Each life she might save through proper training balanced against the ones she couldn't save. The survivor's guilt remained, would always remain, but now it had purpose. She wasn't just carrying her dead teammates' memories. She was ensuring their knowledge lived on in others. A month later, new recruits arrived, fresh-faced, arrogant, certain they were God's gift to marksmanship. They took one look at Grace's small frame and quiet demeanor and began the same mockery she'd endured before. But this time the response was immediate. Jackson stepped between them and Grace, his voice carrying newfound authority. "That's Widow 27. Show respect?" The new recruits laughed, thinking it was a joke. Jackson's next words killed their humor. "She's killed more enemies than you've seen targets. Learn from her or wash out. Your choice." Grace watched the new recruits with the same quiet eyes that had once tracked enemies across mountainous terrain. She would teach them as she had been taught, through respect, earned in blood and silence. But this time, she wouldn't let them face the darkness alone. The black SUVs arrived at dawn, their tinted windows reflecting the early morning sun like predator eyes. 3 vehicles in perfect formation, displaying the kind of coordination that spoke of federal authority and serious purpose. Grace watched from the window of the instructor's lounge, her coffee growing cold in her hands. She'd known this day would come. The government never really let go of assets like her. They just allowed temporary leaves of absence until the next crisis demanded their return. Colonel Reeves met the visitors at the gate, his expression carved from stone. The men who emerged wore suits that cost more than most soldiers made in a month, their movements carrying the calculated precision of people who dealt in secrets and lies. CIA Deputy Director Matthews led the group, a man whose forgettable face had orchestrated unforgettable operations. Grace knew him by reputation, if not by sight. He was the kind of bureaucrat who moved human pieces across global chessboards without considering the blood left behind. The meeting room had been cleared of all personnel except Grace, Reeves, and the visitors. Matthews didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Widow 27, we need Black Viper operational again. A new threat has emerged that requires your specific skill set. Someone is selling classified intelligence to foreign powers. American assets are dying. Operations are being compromised. We need someone who can operate in denied territory. Someone who's already dead on paper." Grace's response was silence, but Matthews continued. "The seller has been identified. You knew him as General Morrison, your former commanding officer, the man who sent Black Viper on its final mission. He didn't just betray your unit, he orchestrated it. Sold you to the highest bidder, then covered his tracks by ensuring no survivors could testify. Except you survived, and now he's doing it again with other units." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Grace's hands remained perfectly still, but Reeves noticed the micro-expressions that flickered across her face. Rage, grief, betrayal, cycling through in milliseconds before returning to that practiced neutrality. Morrison, the man who'd pinned medals on their chests before sending them to die. The man who'd spoken at their memorial services while knowing he'd murdered them. Matthews leaned forward, sensing her internal struggle. "He's in Prague now, meeting with buyers. We need him eliminated before he can complete the next sale. You're the only one who can get close enough. He thinks you're dead. That gives us an advantage. 1 shot, 1 kill, and 6 months of luxury retirement wherever you want. Full benefits restored. Your choice of assignment afterward. Or disappear forever with our blessing and a full pension." But Grace had learned things in these months at Fort Bragg that 14 months of survival hadn't taught her. She'd learned that the living needed her more than the dead needed vengeance. She'd discovered that teaching others to survive meant more than adding to her body count. These recruits, arrogant and naive and alive, had given her something she'd thought lost in those European mountains: purpose beyond killing. The Black Viper died in those mountains. Her voice was quiet but firm. "I'm just a trainer now. Find another way to stop Morrison. I've killed enough people, now I save them." Matthew's expression hardened. "You would let the man who murdered your team continue operating? You would allow him to profit from their sacrifice?" "This isn't just about revenge, Widow. This is about preventing future betrayals, future Black Vipers sent to their deaths. You could end it." The standoff might have continued, but it was interrupted by voices in the hallway. Jackson, Martinez, and Brooks had been listening, their concern for Grace overriding military protocol. They burst into the room, consequences be damned. Jackson spoke for all of them. "Ma'am, we know they want you to leave, but you've given us something worth more than training. You've shown us what honor looks like. Stay and teach us to be like you." Matthews started to object to the interruption, but Grace raised a hand. Her decision was made. These young soldiers had reminded her that life was about more than perfectly placed bullets. It was about passing on knowledge, preventing future casualties, building something better from the ashes of what was lost. She faced Matthews directly. "Find another way. Widow 27 is dead. Grace Mitchell teaches warriors now." 2 weeks later, news broke on international channels. General Morrison, retired, had been found dead in his Prague hotel room. The official cause was listed as suicide, but intelligence communities whispered about the precision of the single gunshot wound. Grace watched the news with an expression that revealed nothing. She knew there were other Black Viper survivors out there, ghosts who hadn't found their way back to the light. One of them had finished what she'd chosen to walk away from. That evening, Grace's phone buzzed with an encrypted message. "Widow 27, this is Widow 12. I'm alive. 4 others survived. Morrison is handled. Ready to come home?" Grace read the message 3 times, processing the impossible truth. She wasn't the last one. Others had made it out. Her team, or what remained of it, was still operational somewhere in the shadows. She deleted the message without responding and walked to the memorial wall, where 6 empty spaces waited for photos that would never come. Their mission had been classified, their existence denied, their sacrifice unacknowledged. But here at Fort Bragg, she'd built them a different kind of memorial. Every student she trained carried their legacy forward. Every life saved through proper training honored their memory better than any plague or ceremony could. Hayes found her there, standing at attention before the empty spaces. He'd completed his transformation from arrogant instructor to humble student, now wearing a small Black Viper memorial patch he'd had made. Without words, he stood beside her, sharing the vigil. Others joined them: Jackson, Martinez, Brooks, then more recruits who'd heard the stories and understood the weight of unrecognized sacrifice. 6 months later, Fort Bragg's Advanced Sniper Training Center had become the premier combat preparation facility in the Americas. Grace's methods, born from survival and loss, revolutionized how America trained its long-range specialists. The Wall of Honor now bore her photograph, not as Widow 27, but as Grace Mitchell, Master Instructor. The plaque beneath read simply, "She teaches warriors." But late at night, when the ranges were empty and the barracks quiet, Grace's phone would buzz with encrypted messages, updates from ghosts she'd thought dead, requests to rejoin the Shadow War, reminders that some battles never truly ended. She deleted them all, choosing her new mission over her old one, until the night a message arrived that changed everything. "Widow 27, they're rebuilding Black Viper, new recruits. Morrison had a successor. They need someone who remembers the original protocols, someone who can train them to survive what we barely did." Grace Mitchell had learned that the greatest victory wasn't surviving hell. It was choosing to build heaven for those who came after. But as she walked toward the barracks, her phone buzzed with another encrypted message. Some ghosts, it seemed, refused to stay buried.